Right now, let's turn to Myles for our chart of the day.
Well, each year at the Code Conference, which right now is happening out in Scottsdale, Mary Meeker, formerly of Morgan Stanley and Kleiner Perkins, now of Bond, releases her State of the Internet deck. It's 300 some odd slides, gives you everything you need to know about what's happening in the tech world, all the changes that are important there. But at the back of that presentation, in the last several years, Meeker has included this slide, which I am calling the worst chart in the world because she markets it as the United States corporation's P&L, which it is absolutely not. So this is the trade deficit, right? Or the federal deficit, excuse me, that we're looking at. U.S. right now runs a deficit. We spend more money than we bring in. You know what? Not that big a deal, just the way it is. The only times we've run a surplus were in the mid-90s, late 90s, which everyone remembers. Bill Clinton was very excited about that. Since then, we had a big war, we had a recession, then we had a much bigger recession, and we had millions of people out of work, still out of work. Then we cut taxes. That's why the deficit has remained quite low. It's not a P&L. It just is what it is. If the U.S. were a company that had debts and it had to pay those back, then this would matter. But guess what? The U.S. is not a company. It's a country. It issues its own currency. It pays its bills in the currency that it issues. Therefore, the deficit is just an accounting identity. It's just the mismatch between the United States' liabilities versus its assets, except it can create as many assets as it wants at any time, so it doesn't really matter. And I share this only because as we get towards the 2020 election, this is something that's going to come up a lot, and I am concerned we're going to hear a lot about the problems with the deficit from Democrats, who definitely should not be out there fiscal hawking, saying that we need to trim the deficit because, again, it's sort of a cosmetic thing for all intents and purposes.
So, Myles, this is sounding awfully
MMT
of you to say.
It's very MMT.
I'm wondering, for those that say, like Jerome Powell, for example, saying, well, we can't have debt outpacing the growth of GDP because at some point there's going to be an inflection point where all this comes crashing down. No one will respect our sovereign debt anymore. What say you?
Well, modern monetary theory is basically how the government operates right now. So it essentially says the way the government budget is put together, I guess we should do the very rough outline. The government says how much money it wants to spend, and then it creates that money. So this whole notion of pay-fors, we can't afford health care, we can't afford Social Security. Social Security is going to be bankrupt. That's not true. Social Security will just get paid out of an increasing deficit that is created by the U.S. government printing more money. But last time I checked, 10-year rates are at, what, 210 right now, 215 on the 10-year Treasury, which is pretty darn near an all-time low. So to your point, Brian, the bond market, financial markets have not punished the United States' fiscal stance. And so I do think that deficit concerning is really concern trolling. That's all it is. It's reality, right? MMT is how we already do it. Right. That's how we already put together the federal budget.
Brian Chung, thank you so much for coming and being able to chime in on MMT.
I always love it.
Brian Chung's a fiscal hawk.
If we could keep going, I would want to talk about whether or not inflation should be really the purpose of fiscal policy. But we'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there.
That's next. I feel like there's a lot of other worst charts in the world.
It's the worst chart because it's how it's marketed.
No, at least this has a y-axis.
Thank God.
All right.